Hello everyone, how are you doing? So today we are going to talk about Thunk and in RTK how are you going to use that? Whenever I used to hear the term Thunk, I used to feel this something like really big and something very advanced and something very complex to learn about. But when I figured out like what Thunk is, I realized that it's not that complex thing to actually understand. So Thunk is, in plain English or even in the Wikipedia, you can find it is like a piece of code that kind of run with some delay. Maybe it performs some delayed task or things like that. Now, if you are with JavaScript for some time, you already know there is something called asynchronous and synchronous. Synchronous thing that happens instantly. Asynchronous is something that happens, while you're doing something else with something, with some delay and things like that. So Thunk exists actually to do the asynchronous operations for you. With Redux or with Redux Toolkit that we are using here, what we're going to do now is like we're going to talk about Thunk, like using Redux state management. How are you going to do asynchronous operation? So far, whatever we have seen about RTK, we are only doing synchronous operation. We have clicked on various colors, colored a circle, or kind of change fonts and things like that, but it happens instantly, it happens synchronously. Now, in this video, we are going to learn about how to use Thunk with Redux and how to start doing things asynchronously, right? So, without any further delay, let's get started. But as usual, please subscribe to this video because keep sharing a lot of great content, and I really feel glad whenever I'm hearing that you like that content. Alright, so let's get started with some code and then try to understand what Thunk is and how to use it. So I hope you recollect this example that we have built, this application in our last video where we are actually managing the state centralized way using Redux, and we are using the Redux toolkit to manage the state where these colors were controlled by clicking on this button, and then the font was controlled just by this slider. So you were actually controlling all these things in a centralized way. So as I was mentioning that all these changes that we're making over here are synchronous now. We are just making things instantly. So now what we want to do, basically, we want to bring certain kind of asynchronous operation over here. And for that, what we'll be doing is we are going to add one more button over here. Whenever user click on that button, it is going to fetch a random color, and that random color it is going to set in the background. Now, random color, we can always do things synchronously, but just to demonstrate that how asynchronousness works, what we will do is like we'll be mimicking like an API service, which we will call by clicking on that button, and that API service will return a random color instead of it stays in the kind of code along with the component or along with the reducers. We'll be just faking or mocking one API that will return the color. So that way we'll be able to realize like how asynchronous thing works, and we'll be able to realize like how to bring in Thunk in between along with RTK and how to make it work. Alright, so let's get started with that coding immediately. So if you're landing to this video directly, I would highly recommend that you watch the last video, because we are kind of carrying forward the same example and modifying that in this video as well. So there are a lot of context I'm bringing from the last video to this video so that we have a continuation when we are learning this. So it's the same app that we have built in the last video last time, where there is a canvas app. Within that there is a color component, which is this, and then is a font component, which is this. In the color component, we had bunch of buttons, and click on that button, we were actually changing the state, same with the font. So now in this case, what we're saying that we'll be creating another button over here, which will be doing the colorization randomly. And for doing that, what we'll be doing, we'll be actually getting the color from an API service. So I have written a canvas api.js file. If you see this is like very simple API file, which is having an array of colors, like a bunch of colors over here. And then every time this particular function gets called, I am getting a random index of this particular colors array, and I am randomly returning a particular color value. That's what it is doing. And the get random number is getting a random number between the minimum and maximum we are passing. In this case, the minimum will be 0 and maximum will be of course that how many elements are there in the colors array. So this is a synchronous function, still is a synchronous function. Everybody calls this one is a synchronous function. But what we are going to do now, we are going to mimic some kind of asynchronousness. Okay. And whenever there is something asynchronous comes, we actually use something called promises, right? So JavaScript promises, when it gets resolved, is basically brings you, the state of the promise is successfully settled, or if there is an error, in that case, the promise gets rejected, right? So what we'll do first will be writing a function called export function. Let's give it a name called fetch random color. Okay. And with this, what we'll do is like, we will return a promise. So to create a promise, we know that you have to new a promise. And then what we'll do is like, we will resolve this guy. So this is an executor function. By the way, if you're new to promise, what I would suggest is that I have a full-fledged series on JavaScript promise. Please check it out. And I'm sure that after you go through it, you won't have any doubt about how the promises and asynchronous JavaScript works under the hood. All right. So we have this, and then what we'll do is like, we will do something special here. What are we going to do over here? So whenever this promise is resolved, what I mean is that promise is resolved, the executor function actually gets called, and once the promise gets resolved, what happens is basically there will be a then, which will the promise handler, which will handle the promise. So in this case, our promise is basically we are going to use something called say set timeout, which will mimic that, there is something happening asynchronously, which is taking some amount of time. Okay. So we'll do this over here, and then we'll do like whatever the data is basically get random color, and everything is happening. The resolve things happen, everything is happening. This is the promise thing is happening. Let's say take some kind of 1000 millisecond, which is like 1 second delay. So what is this code doing now? Let's go through once more. Fetch random color returns a promise. That means anybody calling this particular random color, they have to handle this promise that is being returned from here. And what exactly promise executor function doing? It is just executing this random color with certain delay. That means the random color will, over the caller, the random color will be returned, or random color will be returned only after 1 second of delay. We can play around with this number to make it more delayed and things like that. So we are good with this. We have a fetch random color function, which will be now calling to get the asynchronousness. All right. So where are we going to call this fetch random color? What is your guess that where are we going to call? Okay, if you are guessing that we'll be calling inside canvas slice, because slice is the heart of RTK, right? Where we actually have all the reducers written. We know that how the functions how the actions get executed. We know like how to define selectors and all these things together. So that's the heart of it. You are right. If your case is like that, we are going to call this from our slice, our canvas slice, but in a different circumstances. So let's see that. So we'll go ahead and open up our stuff called canvas slice. Okay, so canvas, yeah, this is our canvas slice. Now in the canvas slice, we are going to use this one. So first what we'll be doing, we'll be importing, of course. So import fetch random color from canvas API. So we have done the invocation. Now fetch this random color, this particular API needs to be called from our slice. So now this is an asynchronous call. This is an asynchronous code. Now to use it in RTK provides an API. This is what you need to pay attention to. RTK provides an API called createAsyncThunk. Okay. So what we'll do, createAsyncThunk is what we are importing. This is the API. Now this API we have to call, createAsyncThunk API we have to call where we can pass three things. The first thing is the action name. If a certain action happen, then only this call this particular thunk. Second thing is a callback function. Second thing is a callback function which will handle the data, which will actually handle what is supposed to happen asynchronously. And third thing is the options. That is optional. The third parameter is completely optional. Okay. So what we are going to do now over here, we are going to write this createAsyncThunk. So createAsyncThunk we are going to use. Whereas the first parameter we are going to pass the action name. Maybe your action name would be canvas/fetch random color. And the second parameter will be, a callback function. Within that callback function, what we are going to use is like we are going to handle this fetch random color. And the third one will be certain options that you can optionally pass to createAsyncThunk. In this video, we might not be looking into those, as such. So let's go ahead and start creating this particular, createAsyncThunk implementation. So what we'll do export const, say paint color async, okay, and then we do createAsyncThunk. And in the createAsyncThunk, the first thing that we are going to do, of course, is the action name. So we'll say canvas/fetch random color. And the second thing, as I told, is a callback function. Of course, the callback function we can write like this, like an arrow function, right? And then the arrow function ends over here, and inside this what we are going to do, basically we are going to deal with this fetch random color. Now remember, the fetch random color returns a promise, right? So it means that whenever I'm handling the promise, there are two ways I can do it. One way, of course, doing the .then.catch way of doing that. Another way of doing is the async and await way of doing that. So JavaScript provides two special keywords called async and await to handle these asynchronous functions, asynchronous operations. We will be using that. If you're new to async and await, I have a video already. Please go ahead and check that. I'll be also sharing the link of all those videos into the comment section of this video. Please take a look. All right. So the first thing we'll be doing is like const, say response, okay, equals to await of fetch random color. That's what we are doing. As we are using await, this function has to be async, okay. This is by programming, it has to be async. Now once I have this response, and if you see this this particular function, it returns an object. The object has the key data and the value is one random color. So what I'll be extracting over here is, say, return of response dot data, because I'm interested only on the random color, and the random color is a value of this particular key in this object. So whatever the response come, if I do response dot data, I'll be getting this color. So this is what it is going to do. So I'm done with this one. I'm just closing with a semicolon. So my paint color async is done, right? Then now the next thing that what we'll be doing, what we need to do, we need to tie this thing somehow with our reducers. So if we see, like, if you go back, in our previous video, whatever you have learned, whenever we're creating a slice, we used to give the initial state and bunch of reducers. In this case, the things were a bit straightforward because we used to know, like, for what action, what kind of state, or what kind of thing that I need to do. In a very straightforward, I can write it over here. But in this case, things are not very straightforward because I don't know what exactly this API is going to return. I don't know. It is not in my control. It could be an external API altogether. It can give me the weather details. It can give me stock exchange price. It can give me movie details and things like that, which is not in my control. Somebody else would have written, right? So I cannot really feed this thing inside this reducer straight away because I don't know, like, when this will come and whenever it comes with what it is going to come, right? This is the asynchronousness problem. So for this one, there is a very special thing that we get. It's called extraReducers. Okay. So extraReducers is something that we are going to use now along with reducers. And this is where we are going to actually use, this paint color async function much better way. Like we'll see how these things are kind of going on. All right, so let's use that. As we save this code, we are getting an error. Of course, this is an error that we have made in the API service. So let's go ahead and fix that. We have not closed this parenthesis. Okay, so our thing is back. Now we were talking about the extraReducers. So what will be the extraReducers? Basically, it's a piece of code that we need to write now to make sure that the Thunk is used properly. Now, one thing I want to point out over here, this is an asynchronous operation. That means the asynchronous operation will take some time to complete. It will have some internal state, like whether it is pending or fulfilled, because internally it is nothing but a promise. The promise has the states like it is whether it is pending or the promise got fulfilled, so that we can actually get any kind of value out of it. So it makes sense that for any asynchronous operation, we manage some kind of status, some kind of status, so that we can actually indicate whether the things are really complete or not complete. Now what we'll be doing, as we are dealing with only colors in this example, let me go ahead and tweak this initial state a little bit to add something called as status, and then we will make the status as complete to begin with. Okay, so this is a small tiny change that we have made over here. How and why? Because whenever this button we are going to add, we click, with this status we come to know whether the asynchronous operation has been already completed or it is still in progress, and based on that we might want to show certain loading indicators and things like that. Okay, that's the whole purpose. Okay, now let's get back to the extraReducers. So extraReducers is another property in the createSlice API. Okay, last time we didn't use it, but we have to use Thunk now, so we are using now. So we'll say extraReducers, reducers, and then extraReducers, the value is always a function. Okay, so we'll do this arrow function over here. This is what it is, and this particular function gets a parameter called builder. Okay, it takes a parameter called builder, and in this builder parameter we can add multiple cases to handle the asynchronous operation. Okay, so first case that we'll be doing over here, say add case. Okay, so the first case we'll be doing, we'll take our paint service async, and in the paint service async, now the case that we are handling, whether this request to get the random color is pending or not. Okay, in case it is pending, then we have to do something with the state. What we are doing with the state, basically we are doing state dot color dot. This is what I want you to understand, that why we have added that new state is called loading. So what we are saying over here, that when paint color async has not got the random color from the API, until that time we are making this status as loading, so that whenever we get this status in the color component, based on this status value we can show some loading indicator. All right, now the next case that we'll be adding over here is the case of the completeness. Same way, paint color async. Okay, I'll copy this dot, the state we're looking for what is fulfilled. Once it is fulfilled, what we can do this state now, and then it is an arrow function again. Okay, it's a function. Here we can do state dot color dot status is definitely complete. All right, and then you can also do state dot color dot code, because it's complete means you can fetch the new color. It will be with the action dot payload, right? And this particular function also get the action, updated action. So this action will be coming from my component. The moment I click on it, the action and payload will be the action will be initiated, and once the action gets initiated, based on that particular action, this async call will be called. this async call will call an API. When the API gets resolved, this will be back, the value will be back, and that value will be available as an action.payload, and that value is what we are actually doing in the state. Okay, so this is how the things are kind of working together, stitched together. Okay, so we have some problem over here. Let's fix that once quick. Of course, the tiny error is due to this semicolon. Okay, so we have this extraReducers done over here. Now the next thing that we want to do is, like, we have added a new status property to the color. Now this status property has to be available into your components, and for that to happen, one small thing that we have to add, we have to add a selector. So let's go ahead and add a selector called const, and then we can give, like, say, select color loading equals to state, color dot status, so that this value we also get into our components. So state.canvas.color.status, and we will be using this into our component. Now let's get back to our color component, color.jsx, where we have to make the changes. So the first very exciting change that we'll be doing over here is adding a button for fetching the random color. So let's add a button, and we can do, like, say a similar class name. Let me just copy this so that it becomes easier for us, and then we'll make the changes. Yeah, okay, maybe we'll name it as random in this case, because it's going to fetch the random one. And what we're going to dispatch, what are we going to dispatch over here? What do you think that we'll be dispatching over here? So here, instead of the change color, what we'll be dispatching, we'll be dispatching the paint color async. Okay, so the moment we do that, things will start working, the great way. To use paint color async, we have to first import that. So let's import the paint color async over here, paint color async. And you remember that from our slice, we actually also exported the select color loading so that we can use it. So go ahead and we'll be importing that also. So these two things we have imported. Okay, this from is extra. Okay, so we have included. Now what we're going to do over here, we are going to do this dispatch instead of change color, because that was kind of synchronous. What we're going to do, we are going to call this paint color async, right? So this is what our button is going to do. Now if we save this, so far I have this random, but if I click on it, something happening here. You see that? Something happening here. If I click on that and wait, see, it's actually pulling things randomly. Isn't that awesome? Okay, it is taking some delay also, but that delay is not very evident, right? So for that, what we can do, for that, making it really intuitive, what we can do is, like, let's take one variable over here, like how we are doing this color, getting this color from our use selector. Similarly, say is color loading, we can just do use selector, and then we can take the select color loading, which is the new status that we have added, and in our H2 where we are showing the colors at the top, let's change this one little bit. Okay, so along with the colors, let us also say, some kind of expression like is color loading, if the color is loading, equals to, say, loading. In that case, we will say, what do you say? We will give a string, something like loading, one string like this would make sense. And if it is not the case, let's do a null. Okay, so let's save this, and now let's save this one all together and try to see. If I do a random, see here, loading, and then the color change. Again I do random, loading, color change. Just take that once again time, random, color change. If I do pink, it instantly. If I do yellow, instantly. Again I do random. Okay, so you see that it started working. And if you see in this particular timeline also, whenever the fetch random color, whenever there is a call over here, in the random, the fetch random color, gets called, and we can see like the status also. You see the status is complete, and once the status is complete, we see this status also change from loading to complete, and the color value also gets changed. So this is fantastic thing. This is super thing that kind of working together. And what we have built the asynchronousness with RTK. All right. So before I close this, let me just take a complete overview of what we have done so that we understand. It's a complete recap of thing. Let's do a recap. All right. So to recap the thing, what we have done basically, we have created an API service which fetch the random color. It's a mock API service which returns a promise, and the promise actually returns a value but with a delay with using the set timeout, and the value it's actually get computed by this get random color function. And what we are returning an object where the key is data and the value of that is the random color. Okay, first thing first. Second is like with RTK, if we want to deal with asynchronousness, RTK provides an API called createAsyncThunk. So we have imported that API called createAsyncThunk, and then createAsyncThunk, what it does, this API actually takes 3 parameters. The first parameter is action name, an unique action name. Second thing is a callback function which handles the API calling, the asynchronousness. So in this case, the fetch random color is our API. So we are calling this fetch random color, and if you remember, fetch random color returns a promise. So to handle the promise, either we have to do .then.catch handler function, or what we can do basically, we can actually use async and await. And in this case, we are using async and await, and we are handling this response. We are getting the response data and returning. Now this is asynchronousness. This paint color async is something we'll be calling from our component with the dispatch. So we'll be dispatching this one, right? So when you dispatch this one, it is very difficult for us to take care of that inside this reducers function. Instead of that, what RTK provides us is something called extraReducers. So within extraReducers, we can actually add multiple cases of the asynchronousness, and where we can actually handle different asynchronous states. So for example, when there is a promise, there is a different state called pending. When the promise is still not fulfilled, there is something called fulfilled when the promise is fulfilled, and there is something called error or rejected when there is an error. So we wanted to indicate even that into our UI. So we want to track it in form of a status. That is why in the color we have added a status called complete. You could have done like, loading true, false, whatever you could add. So whenever there is a pending, until we have not got the color, we are making this as loading. The moment we got the color, that means the promise is fulfilled, we are marking it as complete. Not only that, we are also getting the color as an action.payload. So RTK does that magic at the background for you. You don't actually break your head to get this. So RTK, the moment that response.data get actually returned from this fetch random color, action.payload automatically has that value, and that we are assigning into the code. Now the last thing left is our component, where we have added one more button, and in that button we are dispatching the paint color async, and that's it. That does the job. The moment this button gets clicked, paint color async basically gets called. The moment this is getting called, our extraReducers is in action. The extraReducers take care of the state. Based on the state is update the value. We are also taking advantage of the status. So we are actually exporting from it as a selector value, and we are actually extracting this value using useSelector, so that whenever somebody click on this button, we can easily know whether it is in the loading state or the fulfilled state. If it is in the loading state, we are showing a loading indicator over here. Otherwise, we are not showing anything. So whenever I'm clicking over here, this loading comes. Once the loading is done, things are done. And we have also seen from the debugger is like how things are changing. So I hope that you understood how things work under the hood now, how we are going to use the Thunk basically for the asynchronousness, and it's really not a very, very big deal. We just need to understand like how in the RTK certain APIs works, and once we understand that how those API works, I think the rest of the things are pretty easy for you. So I believe that you understood like how the things works, and you will be able to experiment out with it. So what you can do is like just try out the code. The code link is there in the description of this video. Just check out the code. Try to add few more functionalities. Maybe you want to build an API or kind of fake API and just call that and get the color and try to do something about it. Do some kind of hands-on coding with that. Unless you do some hands-on coding, you won't be able to kind of get a great grasp at it. So do that. And also another thing that you can do to extend it, which I have not taught in this video, is like, what if it results into an error? What if when you actually fetching the color, instead of giving the color value, there is a network error happen or some kind of error happen? How are you going to handle that? Why don't you give it a try? Anyway, I'll be touch basing that into the next video of RTK, like if there is an error happen while making the asynchronous call, how we are going to handle that. That will be a short video, but why don't you try it out? And right after that, I'm going to end this, RTK series with the error handling. And after that, we'll be getting into our hook. The hook that we are pending in this React series is called useReducer. So we are going to get into the useReducer and going to understand like how to do state management with useReducers in the React itself. All right. So I'm very excited to teach you further stuff. I'm sure that if you're excited equally. So yeah, please go ahead, try it out, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. See you soon.